Have you ever wondered if miracles still happen today and if there is empirical proof or if there's legitimate miracles that we could actually read in a journal? If so, keep watching because this video is for you. One notable New Testament scholar, Craig Keener, published a 300-page book called Miracles Today, the Supernatural Work of God in the Modern World. It's a book that cites medical records and eyewitnesses of divine healing. But what is a miracle? Craig Keener defines miracles differently from David Hume, the 18th century philosopher. Hume got the discussion started, set the tone with describing miracles as a violation of nature. Rather, Dr. Keener notes, miracles throughout history usually have been defined as God's extraordinary action. Miracles are not what God does all the time, and so we can refer to miracles as God's general or special divine action. But how common are miracles today? Hundreds of millions worldwide have seen or have had a miracle they claim. Are Christians the only ones who get healed? It's true there are miracle accounts in other religions, but why is that? Why do other religions have accounts of this? Many people around the world who did not start with a Christian premise have actually abandoned centuries of ancestral tradition, sometimes of great social costs. But why? Because they were convinced that a healing took place in Jesus' name. One example, in approximately the year 2000, there was a report in the China Christian Council, which is a collection of Christian Protestant churches at this time. The government of China allowed these churches to actually meet. The churches in China reported that half of all conversions to faith in Jesus in the previous 20 years were due to faith healings and having these experiences. Some estimate in the house church movement and the rural area is as high as 90% being healed. We're talking about millions of people. But I suppose we want to see the evidence for ourselves. So are there credible evidence that miracles are attested to in peer-reviewed medical journals? The answer is yes. Miracles are written up in journals. For example, the journal Science Direct, which is a peer-reviewed journal in the areas of physical sciences, engineering, life sciences, health sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. The authors of this one particular article write this about a male infant who at 2 weeks of age was hospitalized because he was forcefully vomiting. The doctors performed a pylomyotomy, a surgical procedure that treats pylorstenosis, easy for me to say, which is a condition that causes baby to vomit shortly after feeding. Shortly after the procedure, the baby was diagnosed with gastroparesis and had to have tubes put in him so he could receive nutrients in order to survive. For 16 years, he was completely dependent on tubes to sustain his life. This case study was approved by the Institutional Review Board of the Global Medical Research Institute. And here's another quote from the journal. In November 2011, he experienced proximal intercessory prayer at a church and felt an electric shock starting from his shoulder and going through his stomach. After the prayer experience, he was unexpectedly able to tolerate oral feedings. The G and J tube were removed 4 months later, and he did not require any further special treatments for his condition, as all symptoms had resolved. Over 7 years later, he has been freed from symptoms. This article investigates a case of proximal intercessory prayer as an alternative intervention for resolving severe idiopathic gastroparesis when maximal medical management is not effective. At the time of this medical journal was published, the male was 23 years of age, still healed. This journal article goes on to describe what his family believed. His family were Christians, but they believed that miracles had stopped after the Bible times. On November 6, 2011, they went to a church that believed God still heals, like in Bible days. As he was listening to the preacher who himself had a miraculous healing, this patient began to feel something happening inside him. He told God that if he heals me, I will share the good news of Jesus and my healing with everyone. After the service, the preacher and the parents prayed for him, and the boy felt something like a jolt happening inside of him. This patient was completely dependent on the tubes inside of him to sustain his life, and he could not tolerate any form of oral feeding. And yet, after he was healed, he could eat that very night. He could eat. The authors write this: after receiving proximal intercessory prayer, his intolerance to oral feeding was completely resolved. 1 month after the healing, he was completely taken off the tubes that used to sustain his life. The authors write, a noteworthy observation is that studies showing positive effects of prayer have typically involved intercessors who either profess either one, being born again Christians with a commitment to daily devotional prayer and active fellowship with their local church, or two, faith in healing. The authors write, however, in most cases, especially of idiopathic gastroparesis, standard medical therapy is not effective to completely resolve symptoms of several gastroparesis, and despite some relatively symptom-free intervals, it remains a chronic, lifelong condition. The most common treatments include symptom management, correction of fluid and electrolytes imbalance, and maintenance of optimal nutritional status. In other words, it is not common for this condition to just go away, but with prayer and God's willingness to heal, he was healed. I don't know why God chooses to heal some and not choose to heal others, but God does heal, and there's evidence in this medical journal here, and there's millions of anecdotal evidence of God healing as well. It is legitimate that God heals. Healings are another reason to believe in the existence of God. God is real. For more on topics like this and topics around the Bible, be sure to like this video and subscribe.